Hi guys, it's me, Mrs. Vogel here today reading Ruby Holler. Tried to find a quiet place to do this today, but it's not quite anywhere near my house today, so hopefully the dog won't bark and the kids won't come busting in or anything like that. So anyway, let's recap what happened yesterday in Ruby Holler. We started with chapter 54, which is slow motion, and we got to know a little bit about Tiller and Sari's daughter Rose, and how one time she was at the bottom of the lake, but she was plugging her nose and trying to hold her breath, and her daddy brought her up, and she's like, "Oh, Daddy, you ruined my record." And we also talked a little bit about the secret, and why did they keep a secret about their Understone friends from each other for so long, and you know, the thought was maybe it was because in moments like this, when you're terrified what's going to happen, you have that one thing to cling on to. Then we read the chapter on the road, and that's where Z came and picked up Sari and Dallas and was going to search for Tiller and Florida on the river. And, you know, Dallas is asking some questions, and Z gets a little uncomfortable, but realizes this is what it could be like. Then we read on the river, and that's where we find out that Florida finally finds Tiller, and she straps herself to a tree and gets into the river, this roaring river, to try and rescue Tiller, and she does. And then we get to the next chapter, the Soggy Heart, and that's when we realize that Tiller's not doing so well, and he's got to get to a hospital super fast. And then we get to the last chapter, Preparations, and we find out Tiller is going to be okay, but they're all making preparations for both his return and the entrance of Mr. Trepid, who is supposed to come on a little treasure hunt in their yard. So kind of exciting, kind of fun. I can't wait to hear what's going to happen next, because I have a feeling they're going to be pretty darn sneaky. So here we go with chapter 59, Investments. Mrs. Trepid was furious. "What do you mean you'll be all day? What am I supposed to do with all these kids once they get back from Sunday school? You know Morgan's off this morning. I can't manage all these rowdy kids by myself." Mr. Trepid rummaged in the closet until he found his old boots. "I told you, this is important. It concerns the investments." "Where would you be going dressed like that, in an old bowling shirt and those dirty boots? That doesn't look much like investment checking clothing to me." Mr. Trepid scurried past her to a chair, where he sat and stuffed his feet into the boots. "Do that outside. You're getting dried up mud on the carpet, just like these kids." He ignored her, lacing his boots and scooting over to the closet again. "You didn't answer me. How am I supposed to manage all these kids on my own? And where are you going dressed like that?" He turned and smiled sweetly at her. "I am sure you can manage one day on your own. And as for where I'm going, you needn't worry your pretty little head about that." Mrs. Trepid hated whenever he referred to her pretty little head. It made her feel like a stupid little doll thing. "My pretty little head would just like to know where you are going. My pretty little head does not think that is too much to ask of her husband." There was one thing about his wife that Mr. Trepid particularly disliked. When she wanted to know something, she would hammer him to death with questions until he answered her. "I am checking on some investments, so I need to go look at the land. The land is out in the country. If these investments come through, we will not have to clean up after these kids anymore. We will go to an island in the deep blue sea. There. Is your pretty little head satisfied?" Mrs. Trepid didn't answer him. She was looking at herself in the mirror, remembering the pale blue silk dress with the pink flowers and the gold necklace with rubies and opals. Chapter 60, Hospital Talk. Sari was seated in a chair beside Tiller's hospital bed. "I want to get out of here. Feel fine. don't feel like being cooped up like this. I want my creaky, swinging, lopsided porch. Don't want anybody poking around in here, cutting me open and messing around with things. You sure are grumpy. This doctor said you don't need that bypass operation after all. With a little rest and watching your diet, you'll feel like a new man in no time. Bypass? Pff, makes me sound like a road. And I don't want to be a new man. I want to be the old me. The old crotchety boot I know so well. The handsome old crotchety boot. They'd been talking most of the afternoon, full up to the top of their heads with things to say, and what they had to say wasn't about each other, or what their trips, or even their heart attacks or bypass operations. It was about the Hoppers, and Cranbeps, and Bergertons, and Dreeps, and Trepids, and that Boxton Creek home. We can't let Dallas and Florida go back to that place. Yeah, I know it. Those Trepid people shouldn't be running a home for kids. I know it. Taylor, I love those two kids. I love them to pieces. They're like our own kids. I know it. Z said there are about a dozen kids in that home. Poor kids. It's a crime. I think they're all feeling as jittery as Dallas and Florida when they first came here. Remember how they thought we're gonna make them sleep in a hog pen? Nor was it a snake pit. I just can't hardly bear to part with those two. I know it. And Taylor, I love the Holler too. I just want you to know that. I know it. And Taylor, without you, I'm just an old sock without a boot. I know it. He gazed up at Sari. Do you want me to say all those nice things back to you? No, she said, tapping his chest. I know it all. Good. So, you got any ideas? Can you think of any way to keep Dallas and Florida in the Holler? I'll sleep on it. I'll sleep on it real good. Taylor leaned back, closed his eyes, and quickly opened them again. Hey, I just remembered something. When Z was in here, he said he had something he wanted to discuss with me after I got home. What do you think it's about? Probably nothing important. You know what he asked me? If I remembered what year his wife left. I told him I hadn't the foggiest recollection. Now take a nap while we wait for the doctor to set you free. You need to rest up. Buddy and Lucy are arriving on Monday. Oh, don't need 'em to come all the way down here. That makes me nervous. Kids gathering around like I'm gonna kick the bucket. We've got that little Trepid adventure tomorrow, don't you forget. Trepid. That putrid. Tiller pushed the covers aside and swung his feet over the side of the bed. No time for napping. Where are my clothes? Where's that doctor? Get me out of here. Chapter 61. Mr. Trepid's Adventure. On Sunday, Mr. Trepid turned off the main highway and drove down a narrow side road and then onto a bumpy road to which led to Ruby Holler. He didn't see how anyone could live out here. Bumpy roads with no signs, no stores, no gas stations? Psh, what did a person do if he ran out of gas? What if he got hungry? As his car clinked and bumped along, Mr. Trepid thought about the red Cadillac convertible. He imagined himself driving along on a day such as this, with the top down, his arm along the door, the wind with the top down. Ooh, I tell you what, that wind's gonna be breezing by. He glanced over at where his wife would be sitting, her head leaning back against the seat, the wind blowing her hair. She wouldn't be peppering him with questions. Nope, she'd be smiling to herself, happy to be riding along in a red Cadillac convertible with her husband. That old couple who lived up in the Holler, what did they need so much money for? They were stupid enough to bury it in a hole, he thought. Then they're practically begging for someone to come find it and take it. If a person like himself was just out digging on a hillside and happened to find something, it was his, right? Finders keepers? When he reached the end of the dirt road, Mr. Trepid got out of the car and retrieved his shovel, trowel, and sack from the trunk. He patted his shirt pocket to be sure the map was still there and set off down the path. When he found the cabin, he studied the map, paced 20 feet away from the cabin, and spotted the first pile of stones. Quickly, he moved the rocks aside and plunged the trowel into the dirt. In the barn loft, Dallas aimed his binoculars at Mr. Trepid. Florida aimed a camera, and Sari and Tiller kneeled behind them. Z was perched in a tree near the beer bush. 2 hours later, Mr. Trepid was spitting mad. Dotted across the hillside were the remains of his digging efforts. Stones and dirt cast aside in sloppy heaps. It looked as if a crowd of moles had engaged in a burrowing frenzy. He had not found the pile of money he was looking for, but he had unearthed some strange things. One was a packet of brownies. He tentatively tasted one. Not bad, he thought, but why are they burying food? Are they crazy? In one hole, he'd found only a tangle of leaves and berries, and in another, a mousetrap which snapped on his thumb. He'd plunged his hand into a pile of stinging nettles in one hole and into a clump of mashed blackberries wrapped deceptively in a leather pouch in another hole. He was nursing a dozen tiny thumbtack pricks and a peculiar rash that was creeping up his arm. When Mr. Trepid had lifted one of the more promising-looking stones, 3 lizards raced up across his boots, and one darted up his pant leg. Without thinking, he smashed the shovel against his leg. The liver fell out, stunned, but now his leg was sore and bruised. That was pretty much the last straw for Mr. Trepid. Those conniving people, he thought. They have purposely put this stuff here to mislead anyone who might come looking. He studied the map. He'd investigated all but one of the holes and wondered if he should just give up and go home. Who knew what might be under that last pile of stones? Maybe a poisonous snake, maybe something worse. Mr. Trepid made his way to the last stone marked on the map, kicking dirt clogs ahead of him and smashing his shovel into tree trunks. When he reached the stone, he knelt down. This one had black swirly lines on it. Maybe a code? He tapped at the stone with his shovel, debating whether to move the stone and dig underneath. Oh, well, he thought, it's the last one. Might as well try. I've got to find this money. I can't go home empty-handed. The shovel snagged what appeared to be a length of cord. He smashed it again, releasing a pouch from the dirt. Here we go again. Probably some stupid food. Nudging the sack with the toe of his boot, he felt something hard inside. He nudged again. Many hard little things. Marbles? Pebbles? He probed at the opening of the pouch with a stick, loosening it. Carefully, he took hold of the bottom of the pouch and then tipped the contents out onto the ground. Yes, he thought, payday! He could hardly believe his eyes. What do you think, guys? What do you think it is? Chapter 62, the last one I'll read for today, Jewels. Mr. and Mrs. Trepid sat out on the edge of their bed, staring at the contents of the pouch, which Mr. Trepid had emptied onto the bedspread. Look at that, Mr. Trepid said, scratching fiercely at the rash spreading up his arm. Look at all these jewels. Mrs. Trepid reached out tentatively, touching one of the red stones. Rubies? Mr. Trepid gathered a handful of stones and let them all fall back onto the bedspread, where they scattered like colorful raindrops. Rubies and emeralds and diamonds. But are you sure? Mr. Trepid laughed, dizzy with excitement. What else could they be? But I thought you said, wasn't it a land investment you had mentioned? Look what I found. in the land. We're rich. We're bazillionaires. He scratched at his neck. A stupid rash. Mrs. Trepid felt faint. She picked up one of the rubies, turning it around in her hand. It's so smooth. A knock at their door was followed by Morgan saying, Ma'am, it's me, Chief Gopher. Quick, Mr. Trepid said, pulling the covers over the jewels. Hide these. Ma'am, the baby is dressed. What do you want me to do with her? Mrs. Trepid went to the door and opened it a crack. Just take care of her, Morgan. We have some important business to do. She closed the door and said to her husband, Well, what now? How do you turn these jewels into money? Mr. Trepid had been thinking about that. He'd go to the jeweler's, to the place where he'd looked at that $9,000 watch. He'd take a few of the gems and see if the jeweler could give him an estimate to their worth. Won't he be surprised, Mr. Trepid thought. Wait until he sees what we have. To his wife, Mr. Trepid said, I'll be taking these in for appraisal. Do you think, may I keep one of those? Mr. Trepid beamed. But of course, he said generously. He selected a ruby and placed it in her hand. For you, a ruby. He gathered up 2 more stones and dropped them one by one into her other palm. And an emerald. And a diamond. The 3 gems sparkled in her hand. A ruby, an emerald, a diamond. Where'd those brownies come from? Oh, stopped at a bake sale on the way home. They're not bad. Try one. As Mrs. Trepid nibbled at a brownie, she heard shouting and the sounds of many, many feet trampling down the hallway. And that island you mentioned? How soon do you think? As soon as possible. I can smell the sea breeze already. He rubbed furiously at his cheek. Got any lotion? I must have picked up something out there in the country. It's driving me crazy. So, guys, let's make some predictions. So, how many of you expected Mr. Trepid to actually go through with it and actually go look at those stones? Did you expect that to happen? What did you think he was going to find in that last hole? Did you think it was going to be the poisonous snake or something like that? Do you remember when we talked about that bag from Vinnie's Variety? Do you think that's what these stones are? I wonder if they're worth any money. I can't wait to find out what happens when he goes to the jeweler's store to get those appraised. And if you don't know what appraised means, it means that they're going to take him into the shop and they are going to give him an estimate of how much it's worth. So an appraisal is how much something is worth. How much do you think they're worth, guys? I guess we'll have to wait till tomorrow to find out. Till next time, guys. See you later. Bye.